Table and
Today, I'm filling in for our buddy John, who's still recovering from surgery. Hopefully, we can get an update on him today. Uh, he, most of our meeting is going to be dedicated to a presentation from town staff. So we'll start with a quick roundtable. I don't have anything. I'll be happy to hand it over to JC.
Yeah, just quick on the retail end of things, almost through the first quarter here, and we've received a nice increase over last year for the first quarter. It'll probably be up like maybe 15%, which doesn't feel like it some days, but at the end it's good. Some of it has to do with increased prices and everything. Our transaction spend is up, so it's definitely it's costing more, but people are still coming out, so it's encouraging, and we're hoping that we get some good weather here in the spring and bring us into summer pretty strong.
Well, on the construction side, I was just telling Alan that we just broke ground on the Mountain Valley Community School in New Mexico. And it's a K through 8 community school. And we're doing one in Skowhegan for the Margaret Chase Smith Community School, and it's K through 5 in Skowhegan, and both of the projects have a pre-K program built into it. So they're all different wings, and they really separate out by grade. But we've got those two jobs that we just started. We just finished on a fast track basis the milestone recovery detox. There's been a lot of action on substance use, and so we did it for our old friend Tom Doherty, who used to be at Camp Ketchup, and Tom's the executive director for Milestone now, and it's a 32-bed detox that went into an old Maine Health medical office building over by Spring Harbor Hospital. So we just got the certificate of occupancy on Tuesday, and so we've had that, and then we're having our ribbon cutting for the new Augusta police station on April 5th, and that's been a nice job. It's a 25,000 square foot critical mission police station in the state capital. Generally, it's pretty active. There's been no slowdown, and we're still seeing I'm tracking a number of public safety jobs, Bath, Auburn. The Androscoggin County Sheriff's Office. These are all things that are kind of moving along. We are seeing we're getting more phone calls from subcontractors. So there are some holes. And that we're really encouraged by that, because it's just been a real issue in the Portland area in southern Maine for the last 2 years. And so we'll see how that goes. Locally, I go to work every day and I turn on to Highland Avenue, and it's holy cow. Highland Avenue and Chamberlain Road is undergoing a dramatic change. And it's that, there's that condo project that's right there on the corner next to the daycare right by St. Max. That's going on. There's a couple of houses that are kind of putting on new siding, and I understand there's another project that's there's some land change that's been going on. But then when you get down by Chamberlain Road, by the Morrison Development Center, they have cleared what I think is 5 to 6 lots. And it's a housing crisis. And for those of us that remember a nice sleepy little ride on Chamberlain Road, it's really been quite dramatic. And I don't say that in a negative way. I mean, I think it's the state of the times that those, there were lots, there was some extra land, and they're connecting. And So that's what's been catching my eye locally. That, and I drove through the Downs yesterday and I noticed, I was driving through to kind of check out the infrastructure upgrades, but I noticed that there's another foundation in the ground next to the American House property. And you know, and I haven't been on the Higas in a week or so, but I know the foundation's in on that project on Market Street, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's steel going up by now. So yeah, it's very active in construction.
It's good. So any questions? We have the right team here to answer those details. Yeah.
One thing, Kevin, just hearing about the projects that you guys are doing, if you're okay with it, I would love to connect you with the executive committee on the building committee, because I think it would be great to figure out if there's an appropriate time to share with that committee projects that are happening, just so that they have context of real things that are happening around the state. So I don't know if you're on the, I don't think you're on the committee. That's the one thing you're probably not on.
Dave Heiberger, who's works with Landry French, he is on that larger building advisory committee, and he lives out in Springbrook,
Okay.
about a half a mile from me, but he's getting involved in it. He's got 2 young kids, and
Okay, well, that's good.
and,
I'll make sure that.
but I'd be happy to talk about that, because as I was saying to Alan, I mean, there's both Maine and New Hampshire, there are a number of K through 12 projects that are in planning in various communities. Wyndham and Saco, Cape Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And I was just looking yesterday, Portland just had a discussion about consolidation of Deering and Portland high schools.
Mm.
And I mean, they've got an architect on board, and yeah, so
I think that would be great.
yeah, just give us.
So on the council side, budget is about to take over my life for the next 6 weeks. So Tom is going to be presenting both the town and the school budget with Jeff, the superintendent, next week. So if you guys are interested in just tuning in and hearing what's being proposed, that would be next week. I attended the school meetings this week because they kind of get ahead of us because they have to submit part of their budget. The theme seems to be wages, both on the town and the school side, in terms of ensuring that our wages are competitive between both the town and the school. We have 7 contracts that we need to work through this year. And so on the school side, it's more their hourly services for like food services and things like that. And so from their budget perspective, not going to be a huge impact, but the wages are pretty far behind market. And then on the town side, it is going to be a big impact because it is public safety, fire, and public works, which are pretty much our biggest staff organization. So with that happening, and then with the reval, you know, I think this year is probably going to be a year of choices that we're going to have to make sure that we try and make sure that we put forward a budget that considers, you know, that a lot of people are going to be getting new tax bills that are going to have to be discussed. Some people's may go down, some people's may go up relative to what they would expect. And so we just got to be cognizant of that as we work through budget. Other than that, yesterday we did have a workshop on the FEMA floodplain maps that are changing. And so that's going to be, you know, an impact to many residents in the community. Trying to think if there's anything else major that was on the agenda yesterday that would be helpful. I know there was in this forum a couple months ago, the question was asked about the container that was on King Road. And so it sounds like both the police and code enforcement have put a lock on the actual container to try and prevent people from living there. And so, but there is a thought that, you know, there is more of an encampment somewhere back in that property. And so again, I think the homelessness issue is still an issue, though we did have the social services navigator come in about a month ago and kind of give an update. And homelessness in Scarborough, at least in terms of what is coming to her for services, has really dropped. So I want to say there's less than 10 residents living here who are homeless, and again, some of it's by choice. Like they would rather, stay in their current situation rather than seek shelter elsewhere for various reasons. So again, at least what we were experiencing probably during COVID and where we are today has definitely improved. Now it's the winter months, so again, that could change in the summer months again. So it's just something I think that the social service team and public safety are just really trying to monitor. That's it on we approved the traffic calming policy yesterday, which was great. So staff has been working hard on that to try and make sure when there's a concern about public safety, there's a clear process that's very objective in terms of evaluating to make sure that the right safety measures can be put into place. So that's something that was just approved or endorsed, I would say, yesterday by the council for Angela and team to improve traffic safety in town. That's some big stuff on my part.
And Tom is not going to be here this morning because he's head down in budget work, so.
Cal?
I've really only got one thing, and it kind of surprised me, actually. I've been hearing a lot of buzz and have had conversations over the past month regarding the spur to go. And it's just that there's been people that you wouldn't normally expect are asking a lot of questions about what's going on there. What are we going, what's going to be built up? Access, where's access going to be? So it's really starting to gain some traction with the people that I've been talking with. Some of it very positive, some of it very negative. But it's just, there's been a lot of buzz about it from what I've been hearing.
For anyone who's interested, there's a public hearing on March 25th in Gorham, at Gorham Council Chambers. So that's the MTA's first public hearing. I think there's going to be one in Scarborough in April, and then another one somewhere in June. Westbrook.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there are opportunities to learn more and to participate. So if you're hearing that from people, I would just ask, hey, go to the public hearing.
Yep.
There's opportunities for you to be heard. What we're getting a lot from the council relative to that is a lot of emails on Smiling Hill Farm. Like
Right.
that seems to be like
That's the big one.
that's
Since that Channel 6 news story.
yeah.
Yeah. And what, we have a thing in May 15th, right?
Correct.
With
Yeah.
the Gorham.
With Gorham.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the other piece is I know not to steal your words, but you're planning to do a master planning
Yes.
in the budget, or you're submitting a request for that to kind of figure out some of those answers about what should be happening in that
Right.
area if the connector happens.
Rick, what you got?
Jason. I'm good, thank you. Taking.
So my turn?
Yes, floor is yours.
I'm good, thank you.
I don't have much to report other than is it me? I'm sorry, I can't, you're breaking up.
You're right.
Oh, no, but we hear you fine.
Okay, I have nothing to report other than the Beach Ridge Speedway has changed hands. Has a new owner and is proceeding with development, is seeking approval for development of that property, and Bottom can probably fill in the details if anybody wants to hear, but it's going to be hopefully a warehousing facility for a national outfit. That's it.
Great, thank you, Rick.
And I'll just be brief so we can run the rest of the meeting with the presentation. Just a couple of things. One, we did have the problem with someone scraping our website and trying to sell our data. So we, Magda and I have been working with a consultant to have a third party manage and secure the business database. And we're going to see the first draft of it Friday. We're meeting with them again. And so temporarily we've taken the business directory off the website. So we should have that back up really by mid-April, I'm going to say, back on the website. And the new software piece that we're working with gives us some more opportunities. One, some additional security, and two, it actually gives us the chance to do promotions of different things. Like we could, promote, who's a chamber member, or we could say if we were having some type of event, and we could post which businesses are participating. So it's a public, very much consumer oriented version of a business directory. So I'm really looking forward to it, and the cost is fairly reasonable because we were using them to do really our CRM that we've been building all this year. So we're looking forward to seeing what that looks like. And then there is going to be a ribbon cutting. I don't know the exact date yet for Hurt and Company, which is a both physical therapy and gym type of things going on, really at 79 Nunsuch Plaza. Actually, no, where Coastal Women Center is. And just on the homelessness question, so Lauren and I, the social services navigator, we've all along with our CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, have been moving toward first identifying what's going on out there. And our next phase is looking at options. And so we met with the lead committee out of the public safety, out of police. And there are some really good suggestions coming up. And we're talking to really Kristen Siles at the county to see whether or not any of those options that were suggested could be funded through the Community Development Block Grant Public Services Grant. And that option would really put funding available June of 25. So I don't think the issue of homelessness is going to go away anytime soon. So we've got people that we need to help, and there's a pathway through the Community Development Block Grant to at least fund some initial experiments in terms of how we could approach it. So we're very much looking forward to what that's going to look like. And that's it.
Great, thank you. So, Autumn, do you have much setup to do, or do you just?
All set up. We just
Okay.
Just go ahead and share the screen if you want.
So I would ask you, we have two presentations. We have environmental standards, and then we have impact fees. So pick your poison.
Let's start with the environmental standards.
So we're that. Some choices. We may never get invited back again.
This is a very friendly and accepting group.
Fairness said you all would,
Very nice. No one's going to throw anything.
So this presentation is just a really quick look at the environmental standards that we've been working with the Conservation Commission to put into place. And so this is really driven by the comprehensive plan. There's a vision to protect the marsh and to protect all of our natural resources. And so with that said, a little bit of background. In the development process, we often have times where wetlands are impacted and developers will go right up to the wetland. And so we went to the Conservation Commission asking for some guidance on some proposed setbacks and some options. This started with Conservation Commission last summer, and so it's been going on for quite some time, and it grew. And so it is morphed into what you're going to see today. And so I think there's some, it may be a little more impactful than we intended in the beginning, but I think a lot of good conversations have been had and a lot of good information has been put out there. So this is just part of the outreach process. We took this to ordinance committee, or we haven't taken this to ordinance committee yet. So it will be going in April. So the new amendments, there are protections that are in place, and this would apply for all new development. And that includes development that would require site plan amendments. So anything that requires site plan or subdivision approval. So when basically, if you have a commercial property and you're just doing internal fit outs, things like that, it wouldn't apply. But if you were doing an addition that required a site plan approval, then this would apply. So we've added some definitions for natural resources, and then there are specific setbacks, and I'll go through each section, but for different environmental resources. Wetlands have different setbacks than vernal pools, have different setbacks than rivers and streams. And
Just, everybody received both the summary from the website and the actual draft ordinance, so they've
okay,
got
perfect.
that paper.
Perfect. So the last bullet, and this is important, there's a placeholder for potential waivers. And so I think what we hope to get through some of these conversations is input on what maybe things that weren't thought about that we need to consider moving this forward. So this is just a look at how it works, the little diagram at the bottom. The lime green line represents the natural resource setback. And if you looked at the ordinance, you'll see that there are two things. There's a vegetated buffer and then this natural resource setback. And the top one is the big one. And the vegetated buffer, I'll say, is the most protected area. And so for vernal pools, they are one and the same. So it's a 250-foot buffer around those. We do not have a lot of identified vernal pools in town, but this would apply the way it's written to vernal pools that are found during wetland delineation and those environmental assessments.
Would you mind just giving a brief overview of what a vernal pool represents?
Sure, and that's why Angela's here too.
Quite the thing.
Yes.
So basically you see usually in some sort of wetland, system, but a lot of times it's like, I call it hummocky. You see like in different forested areas, there are these pockets, of pool areas, which are, usually, high, breeding ground for salamanders, other amphibians, really kind of the whole habitat for this greater system. And that's where federal law and state law really has an overview of that and really ratchets down. That's through the Army Corps of Engineers and also through DEP, but Army Corps really is the driver behind that. And so there's a lot of protection around vernal pools because that's really the essence of kind of like the breeding cycles and the habitat for all of the wetland kind of creatures and different things like that to kind of keep those viable. And so there is this real focus on protecting those. If not, we end up with more endangered species and other kind of implications that kind of snowball from there as you kind of change an ecosystem. So really it's really focused on those as being the highest level for protection.
If I could ask what, that storm that we had
Yeah.
2 Sundays ago, I mean, I saw more standing water 48 hours after the storm. You know, we're at a time when you get the vernal pools anyway.
Yeah.
That's,
So
I mean,
it's
you've
not
been
that
here a
there's-
long, I mean, you've been
yeah.
in the area for a long
Yeah.
time. I mean, I've never seen anything like that.
No, yeah,
To that
it's
extent.
definitely, yeah, the storms we had, the January storms, and then like you said, even having these kind of, I would say somewhat smaller storm, but more impactful than they've ever been. Yes, you will see more of these ponding areas. However, there's a lot of criteria that designate it as a vernal pool. So I've gone out with different wetland scientists and stuff, and they actually they'll count eggs. So it's really about how viable is this, so this pool for a breeding kind of habitat. And so they'll be able to count the eggs and say, okay, this is a high functioning, and whereas opposed to other ones, which it's when you have a deeper pool, they're not as effective. So as you see some of those areas, you kind of think, oh, is this going to turn into a vernal pool? Not necessarily, because the deeper waters is not where they want to have, where you see that high functioning kind of system.
And that's why also it's not like we can go out and identify every
Right, you
vernal
wouldn't be able to do
pool. You
yourself.
need
Yeah.
each
Yeah, right.
property would have to be
Yeah.
assessed.
And there's other things around it that make those also efficient, like you need also some upland areas for them to kind of come in back and forth from, like it has this almost like the perfect storm, right? They have to have this situation where the vernal pool is a certain way and the area around it in order to make that a high functioning system. That's why this 250 feet is important, because it's not just protecting that little area that the pooling is, it's the habitat around it, so they can kind of move through the system.
So the next one really has to do with your rivers, streams, or brooks. And some of these are identified already in our shoreline zoning ordinance. It's resource protection or stream protection. But this would take the rules outside of that as well. And so there is a natural resource setback from 100 feet, and then the vegetated buffer would be 75 feet. So this would apply throughout the community outside of the resource protection zone.
What is, for both the situations you brought up, like, what is it today? Like, what is the?
So if it's currently a river, stream, or brook that's not identified in our shoreline zone, we're typically we don't have any set buffers unless they're in Red Brook and they have specific standards. Or if they're part of a wetland and they have to get a DEP permit and DEP maybe recommends something, it's not really set.
So yeah, inland fisheries and wildlife, usually when they go through a DEP process, gets to review it. And they recommend the 75 feet. And so they usually are pretty strong about trying to push that, but it's really a recommendation and not necessarily you shall. And so you'll see a lot of outfalls that end up within that 75 foot. So there's some impact where developers are really forced to kind of really minimize that, but they're still impacting within that. So this would kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a conversation we'll have in front of the planning board quite often. We get at the planning board quite often and we'll DEP said it was okay, the state said it was okay, so can you say it's okay? And so planning board often has that, we'd like to make it a little stronger, but we would like some rules in place to be able to do it. So then the wetland areas, there's 3 levels currently proposed. So there's one set of setbacks for if it's less than 1,000 square feet. There's one for 1,000 to 10,000 square feet, and then there's one for greater than 10,000 square feet. And what's important to note about this is these buffers would apply, you could, and I can maybe show you on the map, you could in fact own a piece of property that was all uplands, but your neighbors could be wetlands, and so those buffers would also show up on your property. And so this one, I would say, is probably the one that's most impactful, most a little bit different than what we've seen going through the development process. So this one, I think it would be important for you to pay attention to, and maybe if you get a chance to play around on the map and look at some properties, you know, and just understand how this would work. And then the marsh migration zone, this is really all about the resource protection zone. So this is really in line with that district already. But the setback is the highest astronomical tide plus 4 feet, or the highest astronomical, so the 4 feet up, or the highest astronomical tide plus 250 feet out. And it would be the same, so the vegetative buffer. So what's different about this proposal is the next slide. So the limitations. So the current shoreline zoning allows some things that are probably not best practices for some of these areas. And so this ordinance, if it gets approved, what we'll have to do is actually go in and address our shoreline zoning ordinance and we have to get that approved through the state. But these are the types of things that we're recommending changes. And so the vegetative buffer is the most protected. So you can see that there's very minimal things that can happen. Now, if you have an existing structure and you need to maintain it, it's still permitted. Any right of ways and sidewalks and those types of things, maintenance can be done to those. But it's really prohibiting fertilizer, forestry in that vegetative buffer area. Outdoor lighting, fences, that's something that comes up quite a bit. We get a wetland line and then there's a fence right on the wetland line. Well, you can't actually work from above it. So we need a setback to protect the wetlands on both sides. So we've drawn this up so that you couldn't do the fences in that protected area, but you could do the fence in the rest of the area.
Is this similar or stronger than any kind of national
It's stronger
Applications,
than anything statewide,
okay,
don't know, nationally, it's all over the place.
okay, but it's stronger than our peer communities in the state.
Well, I know one of the examples is it Portsmouth? We were looking at the
Portsmouth.
wetland, it has actually a stronger kind of wetland
Okay.
setback
Bay
stuff.
Area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So this is, I think Karen sent this out to you, but this is our GIS app that our GIS administrator put together, and it's really helpful. You can go in and zoom in on a piece of property and see each of the different resources that we talked about, and then what effect would be with the buffers. So this is something I think is a little good to go in and play with if you have a particular piece of property in mind. We have this property on Cummings Road right now that's in the site plan process. And of course, this is not in effect, but we talked to them about it when they first came in about a year ago and told them these are moving along, so just be aware. But for instance, his piece of property is encumbered by wetlands really on 3 sides. And so if the setbacks were in place, his property is not developable. And so those are the types of things we need some input on how we can handle those waivers if there are some. You know, it's hard to say, oh, I'm sorry you purchased this property, you no longer can do anything on it as of this date. But I think there's also, you purchased this property, it's encumbered with wetlands, we have strict requirements, here are the things that you can do. So that's, I think, what we're really looking for some input on. And I think this board would be great for that from this perspective.
And in terms of accessing the GIS map where you can look at it, if you pull up your packet, there's in the description of the proposal, there's a line that talks about the map, and you can click that. It'll take you to this where you can zero in on different properties.
Do you have a sense, Autumn, in terms of that scenario? What the impact is across Scarborough in terms of what would then be considered undevelopable property?
I have a bit of I have a sense of what will be affected, but not completely undevelopable. I don't have that acreage yet.
Well, the other thing to keep in, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
To keep in mind is that you can still permit wetland impacts through the state and through the Army Corps. So it might mean that it's really just looking at more of these environmentally sensitive properties, because we keep saying, you know, really the good upland is kind of developed in Scarborough. So we're kind of getting more and more into these really sensitive areas. And that a developer can permit wetland impacts. So we're trying to work through how do you deal with that and then have a adequate setback from your filled wetlands, right? So there is path forward. It would mean that you're kind of filling wetlands and trying to create a buffer, kind of maybe an artificial buffer. So that's like we were saying, it's like trying to figure out what is that path to allow you. So there is still a path. It's just trying to figure out how we word that and how we make that most efficient, while still protecting some of these areas that you might not. It's not realistic to put a ginormous building on some of these properties. That what we're finding more and more too is they're not really suitable soils for that matter. So to develop it are becoming extremely expensive. It seems like the past year we've seen a lot of development come through with between their geotech analysis is getting really complicated and really expensive on some of these properties. So and trying to do that due diligence up front, I think this might be another tool to say this might not be the place, you know, and you start looking at, because when you start looking at wetlands and areas around those wetlands, those soils are not really suitable for putting some of these larger buildings on, as we've seen through like Scarborough Gallery and different things without the settlement. And yeah, there's definitely getting more complicated.
Do you anticipate, particularly for the areas in our growth areas, accommodating sort of the change with either allowing higher buildings or, you know, different different ways to develop the lot that sort of gets them to the same place, but using less ground.
I think that's a really good idea. We've talked about that in long range a little bit, right? And then I talked to the Conservation Commission a bit the other day and just threw it out there. Hey, our impervious cover requirements, we allow 85% in most districts. That's really high. And so we really need to address that. So if we address the impervious and then we address height, it's this, but you still have surface parking. And so long range planning is also about to undertake surface parking. So it's all sort of a coordinated effort. And I think that's the fun part and the hard part about our jobs is trying to make sure that one change doesn't mess up another change and so on. So this map shows you, and this is not perfect. This is a developable property and it's basically based on if it has $25,000 or less in value. So it's just a snapshot of time of parcels. But the green parcels represent the parcels that would not be affected at all. And the red parcels would be affected. Now keep in mind these red parcels are probably quite a few of them are already affected today, just with the resource protection zone and shoreline and wetlands in of themselves. But these are the properties that when they come in, one of these proposals would affect them. And so if you get in this map and you want to see a specific area or property that you're interested in, you can turn on the layers and really see how things are affected.
The majority of what we're looking at though is, I mean, the real red part is west of the turnpike. This it seems to be like Boothby Park.
Sure.
And that's,
Yeah, let me see.
Or maybe west of Route 1.
West of Route 1, really.
west of Route 1. Where is the?
Because this is Route 1.
Okay,
And then, the marsh and all that. I think no surprise. Then you have Payne Road.
I think to Karen's point though, like the high growth area looks pretty impacted.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
This is-
absolutely,
This is Huggins.
yeah,
And it's not that whole parcel either. So it's just once you really have to turn on these layers, you can
Right.
see where it's affected. But as we talk about Running Hill, there's quite a bit in that area that really needs to be considered
yeah.
for resources protection. So anyway, I would encourage you to get on the map, and then if you think of anything or you have any other questions, send them to Karen. And
Is it possible for Micah to just put a simple outline of the growth areas on the map?
sure, I don't know if we even have that layer. But we we do have zoning identified on there, so that actually might help you more. Because you can turn on the zoning that's in the growth areas.
I think Micah can also do a table, right, that would say number of acres affected in each of the zones.
Yeah, he can, but sounds a lot scarier than I think it might be, because like I mentioned, it will capture the whole parcel and
Sure.
maybe just a piece of the parcel.
Okay.
I'm a little leery of putting that out, without a lot of asterisks.
Yeah, but I guess, getting more, like I was thinking as you were describing that as developable properties, are these single family home developments? Like,
It would be through site plan or subdivision.
Site plan or
Yes.
subdivision.
Right.
So single family will hit the subdivision.
subdivisions, yeah. Cause when I first was looking at that, knowing, like, I could read, my eyes were good enough that I could read Boothby Park. And all those new neighborhoods that went in that, very close to Saco. Like, it's not surprising that those would have challenge, in that part of town.
And there certainly is a couple of, lots just off Higas Parkway and others that they're riddled with wetlands.
Yeah.
And, it really would be unfair to say this is gonna impact those properties more, and they were already affected. I mean, they've got,
Right.
their current regulations, it
Yeah,
would be hard to develop some of the parcels.
It kind of like that. Everyone's saying, well, when's Patriot Subaru? When's that Acura dealership? Like that was the longest preload.
Yes.
But that part of town,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
just absolutely needed it.
Right.
well, and that's, an area that has zoning in place for commercial, because Highest Parkway, but it would be effective. So now if, say this property that's next to and they have wetlands, and so they can have 85% impervious, and there's technically no setbacks. So if these are in place and we need some protections in place, certainly that's gonna have to get scaled down.
And the other thing that's out there, and I'm not sure that it affects it, but there is proposed legislation right now that does seek to grandfather anybody who has started the development process from new ordinance development. And so I'm not sure how that would overlay or whether or not it's just sort of noise.
Well, I think from my perspective, if you have submitted an application,
Right.
I feel that you are in that current, whatever ordinance is, that's my own professional sort of take on it.
And so that, I guess that gets back to the question of what undeveloped
What-
property
Right,
means.
right.
But we also don't want to create, a land rush where there's trying to get ahead of this. So trying to figure out what this really means, I think is a little bit of a challenge. But I think we need to spend some more time with it. I think the other question for the board is, I think we can be out in front with trying to get the information out to the development community. So if we wanted to sponsor a forum or something like this, what would be good timing for doing something like that if the board chose?
I think it would be really up to you. The plan is I'm gonna actually show this to ordinance committee, I think on April 10th. And then I'm gonna take it back to long range planning committee just for an overview. We looked at the framework several months ago, but now I wanna show them the numbers. So I don't have a set adoption date. This is not, I think, this deserves a good
Yeah.
look and to make sure we get it right.
I
I
would,
understand.
I would say I wouldn't wanna have this come to council to adopt until all those other consequences have been studied. And recommendations are in place, because I think this is a big change. And I appreciate the work the Conservation Commission does, but I also know they are very focused on environmental protection, which is important, and I wanna make sure whatever we get is balanced with all the other stakeholders. And so it feels like we have one piece of the puzzle, but there's a
Right.
few other pieces that, just for me, I would want to see it all come as a package. And so, and I also think this is a good example of when we've been talking in long range about bringing in the public early, not just the developers, but all the impacted properties, to say, hey, environmental protection is important. Here's something we're thinking. What do you guys think? Before we go too far too quickly, because I could see a lot of people having strong opinions on this.
Sure, this could be really impactful to
Yeah.
specific property, and I think we recognize that, so,
Any other questions before she moves on to impact fees?
speaking of impactful. See.
I agree with what you're saying. I mean, this is gonna be a slow, well thought out. I mean, there's no question that we're seeing the effects of something that happened, like I heard the owner of Atlantic Sea Farms at a conference I was at said. There's a war going out just off our coast, I mean, and we know that there's quite a lot of change coming and we have to do something about it. But this, you gotta study it all, so I totally agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little like when we were talking about the dam, we came at it from an economic development perspective, telling the council, we know you have other things to manage. This is not just an economic development, but here's what we think about the economic development consequences or impacts of this. And so you guys have to figure it all out.
With all of your help.
Yeah.
And I think it's important and with this group too, that to your point, I think we have started with some very focused on because of the group that's kind of initiating this. But I really don't want to kind of miss the opportunity that we're going from 0 to say 250. There's 250 feet in between, right?
Yeah.
And so I just hate to go too hard also that we lose any protection at all. So I think there's a lot of room for conversation, to your point, and to get to something that's actually balanced. Yeah.
Well, that brings up what I always think from a planner's perspective is the impossible question to ask, but how do they get to the 250 or the other setbacks? In terms
Well,
of the actual
I think
number?
you saw it's really starting from the resource protect, the natural resource protection guidelines
Right.
and what some areas already have those in place. So it's
Okay.
kind of feeding off of a little, here's some areas are protected, but these ones aren't. And
Okay.
so are you comparing apples to apples is a little bit of the question. And also to what my point earlier was that we have like inland fisheries and wildlife or US fisheries making these recommendations that are being ignored. Because there's some knowledge behind that.
Sure.
That isn't really, so there, but again, it's from a very focused group with, to your point, one thing in mind, which is the protection piece and not balancing all the equation. So I personally would just like to not be zero.
Right.
So I'm like, I would be
That's
happy.
fair.
I mean, we have these conversations all the time when people, and I think you can appreciate my voice when we go through the planning board process is when someone draws a retaining wall on a piece of paper next to the wetland line, which is the same line. I say, how are you building that wall without standing or impacting that wetland, right? So that's where I'm like, give me 5 feet. So that's where I'm like pleading for 5 feet right now, so you can build a wall. So those are the kind of
when
conversations.
when you're
to have.
saying there are certain areas, you mean certain areas within the town?
Yes,
Um,
that are already very protected, like
That are
around
already
the
very-
marsh,
very
the
protected.
protection, yeah.
and then you're also saying that there are other communities that have similar, and maybe you're not saying, but I mean, there are other communities that have protected areas that are similar.
And I think that
To
started the
Scott.
conversation too, when we started talking, Counselor Shoup brought up, there was some conversation about Cape saying, well, we already have protections when we were talking about Sawyer Street. And so she was thinking, why don't we have protection on our side? Like, why? So other communities we focused on, say, the Nonsuch River has a pretty robust protection zone around it. So Scarborough has focused on the marsh and Nonsuch, and other communities have focused on their resources in different ways. So it's kind of finding these other pieces that are kind of like the loopholes a little bit on like, how do you protect a 50-acre wetland? I mean, that's significant. That's significant habitat. There's significant anything. And right now everyone's building to that line. So trying to protect some of that. And that's why there was different tiers. Like it's a little different to have a little pocket of wetland as opposed to like a whole habitat, right? That you have acres and acres of wetland. That's an ecosystem kind of thing, you know?
Sure.
Whatever goes into effect, does that contribute to our open space plan in the sense that like
They
I mean,
can,
that's-
because
yeah.
it's not developable area,
Yeah.
so that's where the planning board usually asks for, can we put this in conservation? Because you can't.
It wouldn't
develop-
necessarily be open to the public.
Right.
Yeah, but more
Yes,
like
Conserved.
I think
Right.
that's the intent of
Yes,
it is
yes.
it's less about open space for the public and more about conservation of land.
Well, to your point, you mentioned the lots on Highland and there's 8 lots, but then at the end of that is this wetland area.
Yeah,
A little,
yeah.
about 2 acres. And so when they first came to us, they had that included on the end of the last lot. And so what we were able to achieve through the planning board process is, hey, Scarborough Land Trust would love to take that. And you can dedicate it and we know it's protected forever. And so. But now we have the wetland line and a setback line on the lot. And so we're trying to figure out what happens within that setback on that lot too. So can they just clear all the way up to it or what is that? And so this will address that as well.
Plus all that red tape.
Yeah.
So we've been able to, and the land trust has been really good. I think in the past, we weren't able to get those small pieces. conserved in that
Yeah.
manner. So we have another one on Pine Point that we're going through right now, the same process, so. It's all sort of negotiations and planning board, discussions, but having a little bit more teeth to it makes it easier. Okay. Now I'll go back to this.
And also, I would say a little more predictable for developers,
Right.
because right now it's kind of the whim of the planning board as they have conservation commission in their ear and different things. So it's really about, I know my property, I know what I can do on it, I think is important.
Right. And there are some, I won't identify them, but there are some perennial properties that really aren't all that developable, but just because of where they are and what they look like, we get this new surge every 3 or 4 years of somebody else coming in. And there are some advantages to having some of those properties just identified up front that you're gonna have a really hard time developing. So go into that with your eyes open.
So impact fees. The first one. Let's see. So this is just a little background. Impact fees are authorized by the state, and we can basically pay for new things, expansion, replacement, but we can't pay for operations. We can't pay for staff. We can't pay for programs. So we have some flexibility with the statute. The town has been collecting impact fees for quite some time. 1990 was the first traffic and roadway, and then the school impact fee in 2002, excuse me. So a lot of these fees are outdated, and some of the roadway improvement fees will be actually closed probably this year and next year. This is what we have in place around. We have this general provision, school impact fees, and then Dunstan Corner, Highest Parkway, Route 1, and then there's several Payne Road area districts. So we had a workshop with town council last year with the intention of putting into, and it was really started with the school. So we knew we needed to look at the school impact. And so Perry did a lot of work, and then that work wasn't lost because I was able to use it for the recreation impact fee. And then the roadway impact fees are a completely separate animal. They are based on some engineering science. I won't even, that Angela's here. But the recreation impact fees are basically based on the parks and facilities master plan that the council approved. There's a little under $11 million that are applicable. And so those are the new projects, expansion and replacement, but none of the maintenance costs. And so through Karen's magic, we have that about 20% of that new cost can be attributed to new growth. And that's based on our rate of growth ordinance and the number of bedrooms that we have and the number of people in those bedrooms. And so we looked at two calculations, cost per person and then cost per bedroom. And they are within, I think, $7 of each other, 407 and 415, I believe. And so the proposed impact fee is $400 per bedroom. And that's across the board for multifamily, single family. The way I have the ordinance written now, there is a proposed cap at $1,600. So a 5-bedroom house would still get the $1,600. But everybody would be paying the same impact fee per bedroom. So that would allow us to capture about $2 million in 10 years to put towards that parks master plan, those projects. And so we've been collecting recreation impact fees over the years at different rates, but we've not had an ordinance in place. So this will be an official ordinance that gets approved. The timing for these ordinance changes are hoping to go into effect with July 1 for the new fiscal year. So that's the target date that we're on for the yes.
When the community center comes forward, would that be a cost that could be incorporated for impact fee?
You would have to reevaluate the impact fee costs and readopt. If you have this in place, you could incur a new recreation fee or increase it with that new dollar amount. And assuming probably that same 18 to 20% of new cost that you could put onto it.
Right, and just the impact fee statute is very clear that you can't use new development to pay for all past sins. It has to be, just the impact of the new development in terms of your overall program.
Oh, and I will say, going back to that, there's also some language built in for waivers. So if you come in with a 50-unit development and you have your own little recreation center, community center for that group, and a pool and things like that, you can request a waiver. So because you're supplying your own impact. So that's built in as well. It's a council approved waiver that would take place.
All right, so I'll speak to, the traffic impact fees. So I'm sure you've all kind of driven the Payne Road corridor in the past few years has changed dramatically. Talk about dramatic changes really in the traffic flow, the traffic volume, the capacity now is really starting to get kind of pinched. It's been a focus as we look at new TMP, traffic movement permits coming from different developers. It's really been front and center now that's going to be our next kind of chokehold kind of thing and where we really need to focus. Right now, as Autumn said, we do have a Payne Road impact fee district it's separated into 5 different kind of districts around the Payne Road corridor, really from South Portland to Gorham Road, or actually Holmes Road at this point, and then out to North Scarborough and Eight Corners. The Eight Corners piece of the district actually got closed out when some work occurred. That happened well before I came along, so that's been done for quite some time. And as we talk through these 2 new areas on the Payne Road corridor for impact fees, as Autumn said, we're going to be looking at kind of closing out some others. So we're trying to kind of balance the work. We're kind of collaborating with the Downs because of their traffic impact fee. We've been collecting money from developers. And specifically last year, my CIP was for District 1 and 2, which is essentially from the South Portland line to Gorham Road. That section of Payne Road is working with the Downs to put our money in to enhance what they are already doing. So it makes our money go further, it makes their money go further, it makes that corridor more efficient. So that work will be starting this year, 2024. They'll be putting all adaptive traffic signal system through that whole section of Payne Road. The council approved that CIP last year, so that we're taking that development money and putting it towards that. That's also been a push that DOT has kind of slapped our hand a little bit. The town of Scarborough, what are you doing with the development money? You should be spending it. It's just that we've been accumulating it at such a slow rate that I can't do a project on my own. So this has been our opportunity, and DOT saw it as an opportunity as here's what the Downs has to do. The town needs to put in their money from the development community to kind of enhance that and make that go further and make that more efficient corridor. So
Didn't the state kick in some money too?
we do have also a business partnership initiative that DOT is contributing $1 million for the first 3 years of the 5-year permit, which is now 6-year permit. So yes, they are helping to kind of contribute towards that too. Yep.
Does that, what you just said, does that partially explain? It seems like the light at the end of Mussey and
Yeah.
Payne.
Yep.
Is
So-
that in the mix, or is
so
that
that
being
is-
held up because of this?
No, so that's that's a good point. I was gonna bring that up. So this year's, what council will see for budget requests from the engineering department is a CIP for District 3, which is going towards a new signal at Muzzy at Payne Road. It's probably close to $1 million that we've collected. It's just, I can't do a traffic signal for $1 million at that and fix that intersection. The Downs is required to, and the DOT has said it's putting money in. They've said town needs to step in and put their money in. So really, this is a collaboration, and that will happen in 2025. Is right now we're reviewing the plans that the Downs is developing for it. They're required to do the design. And then we'll be able to go out to bid, they'll be out to bid to actually construct that in
In
25.
that, in, does that, because I was just wondering
Yeah.
if the state has any involvement, because there is eventually, right, a widening of where it crosses the Nunsuch.
Well, that's what
That
that's
real
my new
pinch
district.
point there.
So there's two new districts
Oh.
we're talking about.
Sorry.
Again, because to your point, there's all these issues that keep coming up along this corridor.
Yeah.
We're finding the Ginn Road intersection and needing that signalization. That's at where the new Atlantic Federal Credit Union is going on that corner. They actually supplied the design and costs that were able to use to kind of work into this traffic impact fee. It also is that pinch point you mentioned at the Nunsuch crossing. DOT, it did come up during the Downs conversations for their traffic movement permit. And DOT thought it was such a high cost and no one really wanted to deal with it. So they're kind of pushing it back on, okay, town, you guys need to figure out a kind of a long-term way to get there. And so that's one of the other issues. And then just the capacity of the corridor in general, it really needs to be a 4-lane section from exit 42 to Gorham Road. And that's one of the complaints I hear a lot. People calling in is like, you're going from wide to then you're merging and then you're out and then you're merging at every intersection. And so I think you will see as volume increases, you might also see crash increases as you have that much traffic trying to kind of merge and then go back out at different lanes and weaving and things like that. So we looked at breaking this up into 2 segments though, because it is quite a high cost when you're talking about a whole signalized intersection again in the 4-lane section. So we looked at it from exit 42 intersection at Higas to Holmes Road. And thinking that there might be some development that's either going, say, for future permitting into the Downs or west going out Holmes Road and talking about the Speedway redevelopment or anything kind of happening to our west as one impact fee. The second one being from that point, essentially just shy of the Gorham Road intersection. And so again, this is kind of an overlap to that Muzzy Road intersection. But the design currently does not include that 4-lane section. And this is the big one, is the cost of redoing that crossing in the Nunsuch, which is pretty significant.
So, and Angel, I don't know how much traffic is affected by, the Gorham connector, but is there some accommodation or thought that once that goes in, would that change?
That's a good point. I think what their model, I'm not sure if the model includes the connector. That's a good point. I'm not sure that I'll find that out.
Yeah, well, particularly as we're pricing things, if all of a sudden in 10 years, there's a bunch of traffic that really gets siphoned off,
Yeah,
then we don't meet our
yes.
goals.
I know that when we come on Mussey Road from South Portland now, at certain times of the day, we take a right and turn on to, so we come out at the corner where Hannaford is now on Payne.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's a light and because
Yes.
you can take that left
Yes.
safely.
Yeah.
As an 8 corners parent.
Yeah.
Light there is very.
Yes. Definitely. And to your point, it will change people's behaviors. Like you said, there's probably a lot of people that are going up to Gorham Road, up to Payne at Gorham.
Yeah.
Because you have that signalized intersection. And so that patterns might change. Or you might see more traffic on Muzzy though in front of 8 Corner School. So there might be some impacts that we need to kind of look through and see how that works.
And just, but the impact fees, you can make an improvement and pay yourself back. So in other words, the town doesn't have to say, if we need $10 million for a project, you don't have to wait 20 years to collect that. It's always a risk, but the state statute allows you to continue to collect fees to repay for any improvements that you've made.
Yeah, that's what's happened at the Dunstan corner where DOT revamped and kind of reconfigured that a while back. that was done ahead of time. So right now we are recouping
Right.
those costs, and Higas at Route 1 is the same thing. We're recouping those that we had put up for bond.
I know I asked you this earlier, but for personal reasons
Yeah.
only. There was supposed to be work done at Oak Hill.
Yes,
Has that ever been rescheduled?
it is. It is scheduled for 2026.
Okay,
It is in the Downs traffic movement
Yep.
permit, it is required. They did do some reshuffling of projects and moved some others forward and that one back. Just, I think more to do with kind of, how their kind of strategy about development and their sequencing. But it is what it is. It has to be done before
Right.
2027. June of 2027 is kind of
Yep.
where everything needs to be wrapped up. But
And-
so 26 is the date, is the calendar year they're
for
required.
those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's basically eliminating left in, left outs.
Right at Oak Hill, yeah, the 4 legs. And I am hearing more concerned citizens like actually reaching out about those movements and when that is going to happen. Which I haven't, I mean, I've been here since 2015 and it's been talked about. And it got pulled because of I think some of the businesses and properties that would be impacted. So that kept getting pulled back. I think DOT got to a point of saying if Scarborough's not gonna take care of this locally, then we're gonna put it in this TMP that it has to be done. Because it is such a high crash location and a concern. But it's interesting, I'm starting to hear more of the other side, like
Yeah.
everyone's like, when is this happening? I think the next one will be, I'm also starting to hear more about Broad Turn at that gas station as becoming, I've seen people actually get, yeah, it's bad.
It's scary.
It's scary.
It really is.
And that's just narrower and stuff like that. So that's a different animal and I'm not proposing anything over there right now, but it's the same type of thing that you get to a point where we might not have a choice. And that's what's happening at Oak Hill is they've given us so long to try to rectify it and we haven't been able to do that locally. So it's kind of out of our hands at this point.
It's amazing how people can actually be pretty stupid. with what they're doing.
Or
It's
people
just-
waving people out.
Oh, yeah,
I think
yeah.
that is, I think the biggest issue, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, come on, cross 4 lanes.
So these two, there is a third one that's probably a year out. The Downs is doing actually a design. They're required as part of their TMP to do a design of the Gorham at Payne Road intersection. That is also a high crash location. We've done a safety audit out there with DOT and PACS. So there is some, it's just such a wide open, huge intersection. It's kind of hard to get your head around what are the issues and why are these crashes happening. So they're kind of hoping to kind of solve that for us, that we can actually put a new impact fee. That would be the next one that is to come in the future. So there's the whole methodology behind it, as I alluded to. It really looks at the modeling of existing along this corridor, and then we look at growth rates and what we're building out to, and then rerunning the model to see what is that additional capacity you're building in. And from that, you can figure out the difference in the volumes to really come up with a per trip number. And that's what I'm gonna show you. And I guess I would preface this with, this is like, here's the cost of the project, here's the capacity we're increasing, and a per trip number. And so it's pretty large. So I'm gonna say this is where you start from. There's a lot of factors that come into play that I wish John was sitting here to hear. But yeah, so we can get to that. So I don't want to scare anybody too much, but this is like the raw numbers is what I'll call it if you want to keep going. So what we're looking at is the 4-lane section in the Ginn Roads traffic signal as almost $10 million itself. So if you break that down by the number of trips you can kind of add through that intersection safely, it ends up being about $5,500 a trip. And to put that in perspective, our impact fees currently, I think, range from just under 1,000 to like, I thought it was 2,400 or something, it might be in Dunstan. Which again, those were put in place in 1990 or updated in 2000, so they're those costs from
And there's
20
been
years ago.
inflated by the inflation rate, but not
Yes.
necessarily tied
Yep.
to.
So, and then obviously the big one is the crossing of the Nonsuch, which you're getting up to like $24 million. I will say, this is a state aid road. So DOT really owns this road and just doesn't have a plan. And it's not their priority. If they're looking at the state of Maine, Payne Road, yes, is on their radar, but it's not their number one priority at the moment until we have a plan. So it's kind of looking at, again, these are just raw numbers at the trips that we could add by doing these improvements. So the other pieces that I mentioned that need to come into play with this is, since it is a state aid road, is DOT a partner, obviously, in any of these improvements. And what I have found in the past, they have a lot of programs and mechanisms that if the town comes to them with, we have $5 million, we have 2 million, we have something to add to the pot, we're more likely to get the state money, right? Rather than all the municipalities that are kind of reaching out with nothing in
Yes.
hand to say, please fix our problem, which is where we've been to date. Like this pinch point at the Nonsuch River, we've been talking about for years. And DOT's, well, you got no money, we have no money. We're moving on to other projects that are more kind of this beneficial, right, on both sides. Whereas if we can start collecting that money and we can really bring DOT into the partnership to say, we're doing our part, our developers are doing their part, and we're increasing the capacity of this state aid road. Here's what we would like to, to propose to put into that pot. So that's one piece, is how we can kind of leverage more money, whether it's state money or federal money. The other piece is, this is purely the increase in capacity of the roadway, which there is a percentage, and so I'm looking at Karen with the numbers, and I'm reaching out to DOT and our traffic engineers to talk about the whole region is growing, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of pass-through traffic, and Payne Road is a main corridor.
Yeah.
So there's a percentage that you can't really attribute to new development, right, in Scarborough.
No.
A new development in the region, yes. So is it fair to put that kind of on the back, that burden on the back of our developers? So we need to come back to what is a reasonable, and try to do an analysis on what's a reasonable approach to look at what our developers are increasing to the volume of this roadway.
And there may be some capacity as the number of cars per household change. There's a lot of things that, some of that new capacity is really being spent on existing residents. That's a hard number to figure out. Probably not a whole lot, but there is some. Could you give everybody sort of a sense like of a building we may know, and say, well, you know what, the number of trips were 10 or 20 that get paid for. So it's not like, a small business isn't going to be spending $1 million. They're going to be spending, I'm trying to think of Atlantic Federal Credit Union. Do we remember there weren't that many.
No, they had very few. They had very few trips.
How about the,
4 or 5 or something.
Right, something like
But
that,
the-
just to put it in
but
scale.
the national coffee retailer that was considering
So Aroma Joe's
Tigus and
yeah,
Payne,
that's something
like that,
Yeah.
like they must generate a lot.
So yes, a coffee shop, like a Starbucks that's going in at Martin's, or Aroma Joe's, those all trigger also the state traffic movement permits. And yes, those are kind of significant drive-through coffee shops.
And they might have to do offsite improvements that they wouldn't have to pay impact fees. Their offsite improvements may be more expensive.
Yes.
So that's. stuff
DOT,
that's
yeah,
gonna
might make them
offset.
do things above and beyond, yes, because of their impact on these corridors.
Yeah, so there's not double dipping. If they're gonna
Yeah.
actually make the improvement, they're not paying an impact fee, because
Oh,
they're
okay.
actually
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
improvement.
Travis, are you aware of any grants that could be available to help fill in some of the gaps?
Maybe. I mean, there's always money. It's not my specialty, but, there's always money. Yeah.
What about with like PAX and GP cog? Would they be a contributor to this?
Yeah,
project?
so basically, PAX money is DOT money, so basically that money gets filtered from DOT and PAX kind of distributes it in the region, so. I would think we would, because of the scale of this, that we would be going straight to Augusta and looking at programs through. Directly from the state or federal highway.
But, and I would take it that empty hand that you had for years,
Yeah.
that now those lots that are all, that signs up on them for years on Payne Road, I would imagine that there's probably a increase in interest
Right.
in those lots. I mean, does it seem like we would be able to get some funding for the?
Well, I think it's
improvements?
important, and what we're hearing from council is looking at our traffic impact fees and kind of as we said, we're kind of closing them out. So for this Payne Road district to Autumn's schedule, we talked about July 1st would be looking at trying to put something in place with these two districts at the same time closing out districts 1, 2, and 3. Because those we're cashing out, right? We're putting them towards a project and saying they've been done and checking that box. I also have the other district like I said, 8 Corners has been completed. The last district in the Payne Road existing corridors is District 5, which is North Scarborough, which I have the bid docs on my desk. We're putting them out to bid in the next week or two to do that triangle section. So that's also a collaboration with the Downs. They are required to do some work associated with the what do you call it? Where there's the county road and Gorham Road, where those kind of connect 114 and 22. And so they have to do some work over there and at that signal, as well as the signal at Gorham at SEDCO. And then on top of that, we're kind of piggybacking by doing a new left turn lane as you come, if you're coming SEDCO and take a left onto Gorham Road. So we're doing some windings and geometry kind of configuration.
That turn last night.
It's a fun.
I didn't, and I wasn't quite sure I would get to.
Yeah, so there'll be some improvements, and then I think it's funny you mentioned PAX. I think when they see me come in, they're like, "Oh, this is gonna get complicated," because I tend to like, okay, we're doing a North Scarborough project, and I start leveraging 2 years ahead of when's the DOT gonna surface and pave, and so I've got it all lined up a little tight, but I think it'll work, and they're gonna come in when we're done our project and overlay SEDCO Street, like that kind of thing. So we try to kind of make all these pieces kind of align with the Downs, with our project, and with the DOT, just general regional paving. So I think it's all coming together, and that district will also be cashed out. So we'll end up with none of the Payne Road districts. So we're kind of starting over. And that was the point of saying there's a lot of development happening kind of in that area that if we don't kind of at the same time we're closing out, start these ones, we're kind of missing some opportunities to work towards the fix, right?
Okay, so we've got what, 5 more minutes or so?
Yes, thank you both. I'm sure we'll want to stay engaged as we move toward finalizing some of these things. So however we can, remain in contact with you, it's something I know this board will care a lot about.
Is the board good with setting up a forum for businesses to
I think it's a
put
great
them
idea.
in?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll work on some dates with that.
I do think, yeah, I have to take off in 5 minutes. I apologize. I know there are some things we're not gonna get to
It's
today.
okay.
But we can probably get through our approvals really quickly. February meeting summary, let's start with a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Take a second. Jason, any discussion, any amendments? Looks good. All in favor?
I,
Thank you. Okay, financial report. Everybody get a chance to take a look at that. Mark just sent this today.
I'll move to approve. There's only a few of us here.
Like it's only the two of you, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, discussion, amendments. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so I think the fiscal model update is just not happening today again. But Karen, would you have a few minutes to talk about the subject you brought up this?
Sure. So the questions regarding the location for the annual meeting, the Black Point Inn, at the time slot that we do it, really restricts the parking. And I've been hearing just a lot of complaints from people about even the overflow lot. That's kind of a pain to walk down the road at, when it's dark outside in October. So last year we talked with Black Point Inn, and they've come back to us with a concept of maybe we can do the meeting at the end of October, which would allow them to clear out their guests and other obligations, and then we could have the whole facility and the entire parking lot, which would get everybody back on site. The technicality of that is that our bylaws say we must have our annual meeting by the second Tuesday of the month. And so one way to accommodate that is to just go ahead and do sort of a quick technical meeting that meets the requirements of the annual meeting for the bylaws, and then have the end of October be just a straight celebration. And we don't really do, a lot of business at the at the regular annual meeting. Really it's about reporting what we've done as a corporation, which we can do in a quick Zoom meeting, as well as do it again as part of the celebration. But I don't know if that works for folks, and I'm just trying to address what I think is a growing problem, which is parking and the crowding at Black Point Inn.
And I think what we're really talking about is, look, we don't even need a quorum necessarily.
That's
for
correct.
that online meeting. That
Yeah.
can be whoever is willing and able to hop online for a half hour.
We probably do need all the board members, and
Right.
Hmm.
And that will just give us much more flexibility with BPI to have our meeting the way we want to.
just not knowing
Mhm.
what and how things would need to change, but is it as easy as changing the bylaw to say the last Friday of the month?
well,
I don't think you need to
the
do
only
that.
Can't do that, right?
It's not that you can't do that. I'm not sure that's necessary. Do the bylaws require that members of the public are invited to the annual meeting?
It does not specify. It just
Okay.
says you must have your annual meeting.
And so
Which is
the
why I
annual
think-
meeting is essentially the board and officers, right?
And I would invite the rest of the public too.
And it's
Right.
just coincidental that we happen to have the celebration event, if you will, on the same day that we have the annual meeting. There's nothing in the bylaws that says we have to have the celebration at all, regardless of when it is, right?
That
And
is
I think you
correct.
just go ahead and have the annual meeting as a separate thing we do, and we can hold a celebration anytime we want. I don't think you need to. I don't think you need. I haven't looked at the bylaws on this, but it seems to me that that's what you're suggesting, and it makes sense to me. You don't tie the two together.
And that does meet the spirit of the bylaws. If we had to change the bylaws, we have to go back to council.
Yeah,
and
you don't want to do.
It doesn't seem to be necessary for this.
Yeah.
No.
Do we feel like we need to make a formal decision about this today, or is this something that?
I would I would say if there's any opposition, we should know, because I think we need to start negotiating with Black Point Inn about what this looks like. And maybe what we do at the next meeting is I come with what the proposal would be.
Okay.
Um,
So how about we just agree, barring any opposition, to give Karen the power to negotiate with Black Point Inn to do a celebration meeting separate from the annual meeting later on.
Do you want a motion?
Sure, we can do a motion, yeah.
So I so move that we have our annual meeting in terms of, to meet our current bylaws. And then have our gathering later in the month.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Right.
Karen,
Um,
in situations where it probably doesn't come up very much, but situations where you need legal advice on something, do you go to Bernstein Shore as the town's attorney? Whereas-
We have
is it-
on occasion, it really hasn't come up all that much, but we have on occasion.
I mean, I suppose that if you felt we needed it, you could. I mean, I shouldn't be giving advice as counsel to SEDCO, being a board member. I think my advice is correct, but if you're really concerned about it, a quick call to Bernstein. They could say,
As I read the- Yeah,
But
as
I
I read
think
the
you-
bylaw. Yeah, I think we're,
Yeah.
we're completely within the bylaws to separate the two, and as long as
Yep.
we're calling that a celebration of business and this other thing that we do before the second Tuesday of October as the annual meeting, I think we're fine.
Good.
No, actually, I know we're fine.
all right.
Oh, God.
Awesome.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants,
Second.
I'll move with adjourn. Thank you, Rick. We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Have a nice weekend.
Thanks, Rick.
Then.
We have about 50 more questions. So what's up, is it our, you're recording now?
Okay. And he was,
So what's up with
Transportation.
with the Tigers Route 1?
so we have him.
So you go-
Is there